My name is Matthew, 32 years old, and I never thought my homecoming would unfold like this. After 7 years of minimal contact, I returned for my parents' 40th anniversary, carrying secrets of my military career that nobody knew about. My sister Amanda had always treated me like the family disappointment. Tonight, her pilot boyfriend was there too, both ready to showcase their success, while I sat quietly. Little did she know that in exactly 43 minutes, her perfect evening would shatter when that uniformed officer walked in. If you're watching this now, drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from, hit that like button, and subscribe to hear how a single salute silenced a lifetime of mockery. Growing up as the middle child in the Thompson household meant existing in the perpetual shadow of my siblings. On one side was my older sister Amanda, 3 years my senior, and seemingly perfect in every way. On the other was my younger brother Jason, the baby of the family who naturally received extra attention. I somehow fell into the invisible space between them, never quite measuring up to Amanda's achievements or needing the special care Jason received. Amanda was the golden child from the beginning. Straight A student, debate team captain, class president, you name it. While most siblings might encourage each other, Amanda developed a habit of using her successes as weapons against me. Maybe if you applied yourself like I do, Mom and Dad would have something to be proud of, she'd say after bringing home another perfect report card while I struggled with C's and B's. These comments always came with that signature smirk of hers, one I'd grow to resent over the decades that followed. My parents never directly put us in competition, but their actions spoke volumes. When Amanda made honor roll, they'd take her out for a special dinner. When I finally brought home a B+ in science after struggling all semester, I got a quick good job before the conversation shifted back to Amanda's college applications. The disparity was subtle enough that complaining would make me seem petty, yet consistent enough to create a lasting wound. School was particularly difficult for me. I had undiagnosed ADHD that made sitting still and focusing nearly impossible. Teachers labeled me as disruptive or lazy, while Amanda was constantly held up as the example I should follow. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" became a recurring theme throughout my education. Each comparison chipped away at my self-worth, reinforcing the idea that I would never be good enough. The only subject that captured my attention was history, particularly military history. I became fascinated with stories of strategy, courage, and service. My bedroom walls were covered with posters of aircraft and ships instead of sports stars. Amanda called it my little war obsession and would roll her eyes whenever I tried sharing something I'd learned. "Still playing soldier, Matthew?" she'd ask. Even when I was well into high school, my parents would chuckle at her teasing, not recognizing how each dismissal stung. Family gatherings were the worst. Relatives would fawn over Amanda's accomplishments, while I'd be lucky to get a generic, "How's school going?" that rarely led to any meaningful conversation. Amanda developed a talent for disguising insults as casual observations. "Matthew's still trying to figure out his path," she'd tell relatives with feigned sympathy, as though my existence was somehow tragic. Not everyone can be focused, I guess. The adults would nod understandingly, while I silently absorbed another public undermining. One incident from high school remains particularly vivid. I had finally made the varsity swim team after 2 years of dedicated training. At dinner that night, I excitedly shared the news. Before my parents could even respond, Amanda interjected, "The coach probably needed to fill a quota. They took practically everyone this year." My momentary pride evaporated instantly. What should have been a celebration became another reminder of my perceived mediocrity. My father changed the subject to Amanda's acceptance into 3 Ivy League schools, and my achievement was forgotten. By graduation, I had developed a protective shell of indifference as a defense mechanism. When I announced my decision to enlist in the Air Force, the response was predictably dismissive. Amanda laughed outright. The military? Really? That's your big plan? My parents exchanged concerned glances, clearly viewing my choice as confirmation that I couldn't hack it in college like my brilliant sister. What they interpreted as settling for less was actually my first step toward finding my true path. The military is a fallback for people who can't do anything else. Amanda stated matter-of-factly during my last family dinner before leaving for basic training. I guess it makes sense for you. She had just completed her first year at Princeton and spoke with the unearned authority of someone who believed education only happened in prestigious universities. My parents didn't challenge her assessment, their silence feeling like agreement. I remember staring at my plate, silently vowing that someday I would prove them all wrong. The day I left home, my father awkwardly patted my shoulder and said, "Maybe this will give you some discipline." It wasn't encouragement so much as a final critique of who I'd been. My mother hugged me tearfully, genuinely concerned, but fundamentally misunderstanding my choice. Amanda didn't even come downstairs to say goodbye. Her parting message had been delivered the night before. Try not to wash out in the first week. As the bus pulled away from my childhood home, I felt not sadness but relief. For the first time, I was escaping the narrative my family had written for me. Basic training hit me like a freight train. The first week was everything my sister had predicted it would be. Grueling, disorienting, and seemingly designed to break me. My drill sergeant, Technical Sergeant Rivera, seemed to take particular pleasure in pointing out my shortcomings. "Thompson, my grandmother moves faster than you," he'd bellow as I struggled through obstacle courses. Each night I collapsed onto my bunk, muscles screaming, wondering if Amanda had been right all along. But something unexpected happened during those brutal first weeks. While I had always crumbled under my family's criticism, the military's challenges affected me differently. Instead of deflating me, they fueled a determination I never knew I possessed. The structured environment actually helped with my undiagnosed ADHD. For the first time, I wasn't being compared to anyone else. I was competing against my own previous performance, pushing to be better than I was yesterday. By week 4, I started noticing changes. My body was transforming, growing stronger and more capable. More importantly, my mind was sharpening. The discipline that my father had dismissively mentioned was indeed taking hold, but not in the way he had implied. It wasn't fixing something broken. It was revealing potential that had always been there, dormant beneath years of family conditioning. One rainy afternoon during a particularly challenging training exercise, something clicked. We were navigating a complex team challenge that required both physical endurance and strategic thinking. Without consciously deciding to, I found myself taking charge, coordinating our team's efforts, identifying each person's strengths, and deploying them effectively. When we finished first among all the squads, Sergeant Rivera gave me a long, appraising look. "Thompson," he said afterward, "you've got something. Never seen someone with your natural instinct for tactical assessment. Ever considered officer training?" That brief moment of recognition from someone with no reason to falsely praise me carried more weight than any validation I'd sought from my family. It was the first time someone had seen me not as less than, but as valuable in my own right. Following basic training, I was selected for specialized programs that recognized my aptitude for aviation operations and tactical planning. I threw myself into the training with everything I had. The classroom environments that had once been sources of anxiety became places where I excelled. My ADHD, once a liability, became an asset as I could hyper-focus on subjects that engaged me. My instructors noted my ability to see patterns and solutions that others missed. 3 years into my service, I was deployed to a conflict zone that I still can't discuss in detail. Our unit was tasked with a complex extraction mission that went sideways when unexpected enemy forces appeared. When our commanding officer was incapacitated, I found myself taking command, making split-second decisions that ultimately brought our entire team home safely. The action earned me my first commendation and accelerated my advancement. From there, my career trajectory steepened dramatically. I qualified for officer training and excelled. Each promotion came faster than the last as my superiors recognized not just my tactical abilities but my leadership skills. The quiet, unsure young man who had joined to escape his family's shadow was developing into a confident officer with genuine respect from both superiors and those under his command. Colonel Westfield became my most influential mentor. A 30-year veteran with a legendary reputation, he took a particular interest in my development. "You've got a rare combination, Thompson," he told me after I'd successfully led a multinational training exercise. "Technical brilliance and emotional intelligence. Most officers have one or the other. The ones with both go far." Under his guidance, I advanced through positions of increasing responsibility, eventually leading specialized units on classified operations that made tangible differences in global security. By my 10th year of service, I had achieved the rank of lieutenant colonel, something that typically takes much longer. My official service record included commendations I couldn't discuss and references to operations that would remain classified for decades. Throughout this transformation, I maintained minimal contact with my family. Occasional phone calls to my parents consisted mostly of surface-level pleasantries. They never asked detailed questions about my career, seeming to assume I was simply serving in some basic capacity. I made no effort to correct their assumptions. Amanda, now a rising executive at a Fortune 500 company, would sometimes get on the line to deliver condescending updates about her latest promotion or acquisition. "Still in the Air Force?" "Well, I guess it's steady employment," she said during our last brief conversation. The truth was, I no longer needed their approval. The wounded young man desperate for validation had been replaced by someone who found purpose in service and leadership. The respect I'd earned from people whose opinions actually mattered had healed those old childhood injuries. I'd built a life and identity completely separate from the narrative my family had constructed around me. When the invitation arrived for my parents' 40th anniversary celebration, my first instinct was to decline. I had a legitimate excuse with my duties, but after reflection, I realized that perhaps it was time to close that chapter properly, not with grand revelations or confrontations, but simply by attending as the person I had become, secure in that identity regardless of how they might still see me. Little did I know that fate had a more dramatic resolution in store, one that would bring 7 years of separate lives crashing back together in a moment of reckoning none of us could have anticipated. The drive to my parents' house felt surreal. Familiar landmarks of my hometown scrolled past the rental car window like scenes from someone else's memory. 10 years in the military, 7 with minimal contact, had created a distance that couldn't be measured in miles alone. I had deliberately chosen to wear civilian clothes. Dark jeans, a simple button-up shirt, and a blazer. Nothing that would reveal my rank or achievements. Part of me wanted to arrive in full dress uniform with all my commendations displayed, but that would have been about seeking validation, and I was past that. Or so I told myself. My parents had done well for themselves over the years. Dad's investment firm had thrived, and they'd upgraded from our modest childhood home to an impressive colonial-style house in the most exclusive neighborhood in town. The circular driveway was filled with luxury vehicles when I arrived, suggesting most guests had already shown up. I sat in my rental car for a few extra moments, steeling myself for the evening ahead. The door was answered by my mother, who looked momentarily startled before her face arranged itself into a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Matthew, you made it." Her tone suggested surprise, as though she had expected me to back out. Her hug was brief and awkward, like embracing a distant acquaintance rather than a son. "Happy anniversary, Mom," I said, handing her the small gift I'd brought, a handcrafted jewelry box from an artisan in one of the countries where I'd been stationed. I didn't mention its origins or significance. "Thank you, dear. Come in, everyone's in the back." She led me through the house I had never visited before, past framed family photos that charted milestones I had mostly missed. I noticed that images of me were sparse compared to the numerous glamour shots of Amanda and casual snaps of my younger brother Jason with his growing family. The back patio and garden had been transformed into an elegant party space. About 30 people mingled under strung lights. Many faces I recognized from childhood, now aged by the same decade that had changed me. Conversations momentarily paused as I entered, a ripple of curious glances washing over me before polite smiles appeared. I could read the questions behind their eyes. What's he been up to? Why haven't we seen him? Did he really stay in the military all this time? My father spotted me from across the patio and made his way over, drink in hand. "Son, good to see you." He gave me a firm handshake and a quick pat on the shoulder, his standard greeting that conveyed acknowledgement without warmth. "Didn't think you'd be able to get leave. I made it a priority," I replied simply, not mentioning that, as a lieutenant colonel with my record, arranging leave was well within my authority. "Congratulations on 40 years. Appreciate it. Grab a drink, mingle a bit. Amanda's over there with her boyfriend. Quite the catch, pilot for United. You should introduce yourself." He gestured vaguely toward the far corner of the patio before being pulled away by one of his golf buddies. I made my way to the bar and ordered a sparkling water, a choice that would later draw confused looks from relatives who remembered me as the college dropout who couldn't get his act together. As I turned from the bar, I found myself face to face with Amanda. Time had been kind to my sister. At 35, she had the polished look of success, designer clothes, and the confident posture of someone accustomed to commanding attention. Her smile was practiced, revealing professionally whitened teeth as she air-kissed near my cheek. "Well, well, the prodigal brother returns," she said, her voice carrying just enough for nearby guests to hear. "Military life agrees with you. You actually look fit." The compliment came with the subtle implication that this was surprising. "Good to see you too, Amanda. Congratulations on your success at Mercer Global. Sounds like you're doing well." I kept my tone neutral, not rising to the bait. "Senior vice president now, actually. Youngest in company history." She gestured to the tall, handsome man beside her. "This is Ryan. He's a captain with United, flies the international routes, mostly Asia and Europe." Ryan extended his hand with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to making good first impressions. "Nice to meet you, Matthew. Amanda's told me about you." Something in his expression suggested what she'd told him hadn't been particularly flattering. "All lies, I'm sure," I said with a smile that didn't match the slight tension I felt building in my chest. "How long have you two been together?" 8 months, Ryan answered. "We met when Amanda was in first class on my Tokyo flight, started talking about aviation investment opportunities, and here we are." His arm slid around her waist possessively. Amanda looked at me with barely concealed condescension. "Ryan just bought a lake house in the Poconos. We're thinking of getting a plane so he can fly us up on weekends." She paused, tilting her head. "So what exactly do you do in the Air Force now? Still pushing papers somewhere?" Before I could answer, Ryan jumped in with professional interest. What's your specialty? I almost went military aviation before commercial attracted me. Better hours, better pay. He laughed easily. I work in special operations planning, I said vaguely. It keeps me busy. Amanda's eyebrow arched. Special operations? Sounds very mysterious. Or is that just what they call administration these days? Her laugh tinkled, like glass breaking. Remember when Matthew used to play with those little toy soldiers, Ryan? He was obsessed with war games. I guess some things never change. Ryan had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable at her tone, but chuckled along nevertheless. Well, the military needs all types. Back office is just as important as front line. I took a slow sip of my water, reminding myself that their assumptions said more about them than about me. The Air Force has been good to me, I said simply. Different path, but a fulfilling one. I'm sure it's very structured, Amanda replied, managing to make it sound like a limitation rather than a benefit. Some people really need that kind of environment. The implication hung in the air. Some people like you, who couldn't handle real achievement. More relatives approached then, exclaiming over how long it had been since they'd seen me, asking the same surface-level questions about life in the military as though I had been working at the local hardware store. Each interaction followed a similar pattern. Brief interest in me, followed by Amanda steering the conversation toward her recent promotion or Ryan's aviation adventures. 12:22. By the time dinner was announced, I had been effectively rendered a supporting character at my own homecoming. As we moved toward the elegantly set tables on the lawn, I caught fragments of conversations about me. Never found his way academically. The military was probably a good option for him. Amanda's always been the achiever in the family. Each comment reinforced what I had always known. In the narrative of this family, I was the underachiever, the one they spoke about with a mixture of pity and dismissal. Taking my assigned seat at a table noticeably distant from the main family grouping, I wondered, not for the first time, if coming had been a mistake. 7 years of building a life of purpose and respect seemed to evaporate in the suffocating atmosphere of family mythology. The evening stretched before me like an operation with no extraction plan, and I steeled myself for what promised to be a long night of subtle humiliation. The dining setup was elaborate, with white linen tablecloths, crystal glassware, and an army of waitstaff, circulating with trays of appetizers. My parents had clearly spared no expense for their anniversary celebration. I found myself seated at a table with distant cousins and a few family friends who regarded me with polite curiosity, but limited engagement. From my position, I had a clear view of the main table where my parents sat with Amanda, Ryan, my brother Jason, and his wife, and my elderly grandparents. The first course arrived, something artfully plated involving scallops and microgreens. As we began eating, my father stood to welcome everyone and thank them for coming. His speech was warm and inclusive until he began acknowledging his children specifically. "We're so blessed to have our family here tonight," he said, glass raised. "Our daughter Amanda, who continues to make us proud with her extraordinary career achievements, just named the youngest senior vice president in her company's history." Applause rippled through the gathering. Our son Jason and his lovely wife Sarah, giving us the joy of 2 beautiful grandchildren. More applause. Then, almost as an afterthought, "And Matthew, who made the effort to join us from. Where are you stationed now, son?" "Colorado Springs," I supplied, though the information seemed to pass through him without registration. Yes, Colorado. Good to have all 3 children here for this milestone. He quickly moved on to acknowledging other guests. As the meal progressed, Amanda effectively held court from her position at the main table. Her voice carried across the patio as she shared stories of corporate triumphs, international travel, and her burgeoning relationship with Ryan. Each anecdote was delivered with practiced charm that had our relatives chuckling appreciatively. Ryan complimented her stories with his own tales of flying celebrities and navigating challenging weather conditions. Together, they created a narrative of glamour and achievement that dominated the dinner conversation. Occasionally, someone would direct a question my way, usually prefaced with, "So, Matthew, are you still in the military?" As though my decade of service was a temporary job rather than a career. Before I could elaborate on any response, Amanda would inevitably interject with a redirect. "Matthew's always been so private about his work," she would say with feigned thoughtfulness. Not all of us can share our accomplishments openly. The subtle implication that I had nothing worth sharing hung in the air. Midway through the main course, Amanda tapped her glass for attention. "I'd like to share a little family story, if I may," she announced. In honor of Mom and Dad's anniversary, my stomach tightened, recognizing the gleam in her eye. "When we were teenagers, Mom and Dad took us on that road trip to Washington, D.C., remember that?" Matthew was absolutely obsessed with the Air and Space Museum. She paused for effect. He spent 3 hours staring at the planes, telling everyone who would listen that someday he'd be a famous pilot. Titters of amusement rippled through the gathering. Of course, that was before he discovered that becoming a pilot requires, well, quite a bit of academic achievement. She shot a sympathetic look in my direction. "But that's the thing about our parents that we're celebrating tonight. They always encouraged us to dream, even when those dreams might have been a little unrealistic." Ryan laughed appreciatively while my mother looked momentarily uncomfortable before composing her features. My father seemed oblivious to the undertone, nodding along with Amanda's story. "Anyway," Amanda continued, "I think it's sweet that Matthew found his place in the military. Not everyone is cut out for the competitive world of business or the rigors of commercial aviation. Some people need the structure and simplicity of following orders." I maintained a neutral expression, taking a measured sip of water. 10 years ago, her words would have cut deep. Now, I recognize them for what they were. The insecurities of someone whose identity depended on being perceived as superior. As dessert was served, my cousin Beth kindly tried to include me in the conversation. "What's the most interesting place you've been stationed, Matthew?" Before I could answer, Amanda jumped in. "Oh, I doubt Matthew's been anywhere particularly exotic. Isn't it mostly bases in the middle of nowhere? Nothing like Ryan's route through Tokyo and Singapore." Ryan, perhaps sensing the conversation was becoming uncomfortable, attempted a more collegial approach. "Hey, military aviation still has some interesting aspects. What kind of aircraft are you around, Matthew?" I began to explain my experience with various platforms when Amanda laughed dismissively. "Ryan, trust me, Matthew's not a pilot. He works in some kind of office role." She turned to me with exaggerated patience. "Isn't that right? Administration or logistics or something?" "Something like that," I replied evenly, choosing not to correct her assumptions. The pattern continued through dessert and into the after-dinner mingling. Amanda systematically undermined any conversation that might highlight my experiences or accomplishments, alternating between nostalgic stories that painted me as the family underachiever and condescending expressions of support for my modest career. The culmination came when my parents prepared to cut their anniversary cake. As everyone gathered around, Amanda clinked her glass for attention and launched into an impromptu toast. To the parents who showed us what achievement looks like, she began, her voice carrying across the now silent patio, who taught us to reach for the stars, even if some of us, she glanced meaningfully in my direction, might only reach the filing cabinet. Uncomfortable laughter rippled through the crowd, who demonstrated that with hard work and intelligence, success is possible. Another pointed look my way, and who supported all our choices, even when they might have hoped for more. My father beamed obliviously at Amanda's words, while my mother's smile seemed fixed and tight. Ryan stood proudly beside Amanda, his arm around her waist, the perfect power couple basking in the admiration of our family. I felt a familiar tightness in my chest, the same constriction I'd experienced as a child when singled out for mockery, disguised as teasing. For a brief moment, I considered walking out, leaving this toxic dynamic behind permanently. I had a team that respected me, colleagues who valued my judgment and leadership. Why was I subjecting myself to this regression into old family patterns? But something kept me rooted in place. Perhaps it was stubbornness, or perhaps the military discipline that had become second nature. Whatever the reason, I maintained my position, expression neutral, as Amanda concluded her toast to enthusiastic applause. What no one in that gathering could possibly know was that in exactly 12 minutes, everything would change. The carefully maintained narrative of family success was about to be dramatically rewritten, not through any plan of mine, but through the unexpected intrusion of the world I had built without them. The doorbell rang at precisely 8:47 p.m., a sound that carried clearly through the open patio doors into the warm evening air. The ringing doorbell seemed insignificant at first. Another late arrival, perhaps, or a delivery. Ryan, standing closest to the house, volunteered to answer it. "I'll get that," he said, setting down his champagne flute and striding confidently through the patio doors. The party continued around me, with Amanda now regaling my cousins with details of her recent business trip to Milan. I sipped my water, counting the minutes until I could make a graceful exit. The gathering had been exactly as I'd expected, a showcase for Amanda's achievements and a subtle reinforcement of my place in the family hierarchy. What I couldn't have anticipated was how little it affected me now. The barbs that once would have cut deep now seemed almost childish, disconnected from the reality of the man I had become. My reflections were interrupted by Ryan's return to the patio. The expression on his face caught my attention immediately. As a military officer, I'd been trained to read people, and what I saw was pure shock. His pilot's composure had vanished, replaced by wide-eyed confusion as he scanned the crowd, eventually locating me in the corner. Behind Ryan walked a uniformed Air Force officer. Not just any officer, but Colonel James Davidson, my direct superior, and the commander of our specialized unit. Even from across the patio, I could see the 4 silver eagles on his shoulders gleaming under the string lights. Davidson moved with military precision, his eyes quickly identifying me among the guests. A hush fell over the gathering as the unexpected military presence drew everyone's attention. Amanda paused mid-sentence, her champagne glass hovering near her lips as she observed the interruption with visible annoyance. Colonel Davidson strode directly toward me, his posture ramrod straight. When he reached my position, he did something that caused every jaw in the vicinity to drop. He stood at attention and rendered a formal, respectful salute. "Lieutenant Colonel Thompson," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence. "I apologize for the interruption, sir." The use of my rank and the formal salute from a full colonel to me sent a visible shockwave through the gathering. I could feel dozens of eyes fixed on this interaction, trying to process what they were witnessing. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Amanda's smug expression transform into slack-jawed confusion. My parents exchanged bewildered glances, clearly struggling to reconcile Lieutenant Colonel with their understanding of my position. Military professionalism kicked in automatically as I returned Colonel Davidson's salute. "At ease." "Colonel, is everything all right?" "Sir, I wouldn't have interrupted your family gathering, but we have a situation developing that requires your immediate consultation. The Secretary has specifically requested your assessment on a time-sensitive matter." The mention of the Secretary, a clear reference to the Secretary of the Air Force, hung in the air, further deepening the bewilderment visible on my family members' faces. Davidson continued, "Your expertise is needed for an operational decision that can't wait until your return. I have a secure vehicle outside and a communications setup that will allow you to participate in the briefing." I nodded, slipping effortlessly into my professional role. "Understood, Colonel. Lead the way." As I prepared to follow Davidson, I caught sight of Amanda. Her face had drained of color. The champagne glass now clutched tightly in a white, knuckled grip. Ryan stood beside her, his earlier cockiness replaced by a look of professional recognition. As a pilot, he understood enough about military rank structure to comprehend that something significant had just been revealed. My father had taken a half step forward, his mouth opening and closing without words. For perhaps the first time in my memory, he appeared completely lost for words. My mother's hand had flown to her throat in a gesture of surprise, her eyes wide as she looked between me and the uniformed colonel. The other guests had gone completely still. The festive atmosphere evaporated in the face of this unexpected development. The contrast between their previous dismissive attitude and current shocked silence was palpable. I turned to my parents with a calm professionalism that years of high-pressure situations had ingrained in me. "Mom, Dad, I'm sorry, but I need to step away briefly. Military matter. Please continue the celebration. I'll return as soon as possible." With that simple statement, I followed Colonel Davidson into the house, leaving behind a tableau of frozen expressions and a shattered family narrative. As we moved through the living room toward the front door, I could hear the explosion of whispers erupting behind us on the patio. Davidson spoke quietly as we walked. "Sorry to crash your family party, Thompson, but this really is urgent. The situation in the Eastern Mediterranean has escalated. The Joint Task Force needs your assessment before proceeding." "Understood, sir. What's our timeline?" "Briefing starts in 20 minutes. We've got a secure connection established in the vehicle. After your input, the decision on whether to proceed will be made." As we stepped outside, I saw the black SUV with government plates waiting in the driveway, a driver standing at attention beside it. The scene could not have been more different from my quiet arrival in a rental car just hours earlier. Inside the vehicle, communications equipment had been set up in the rear compartment. Davidson quickly briefed me on the developing situation, while technicians established the secure connection. For the next 40 minutes, I was fully immersed in the world. I actually inhabited a senior officer whose judgment was sought on matters of national security. The briefing was intense but efficient. I provided my assessment, answered questions from the task force commander, and offered recommendations based on my expertise and experience with similar operations. When we concluded, Davidson nodded with satisfaction. "Good call, Thompson. That's why they wanted your take. Now we need to get you back to Colorado Springs tonight. There's a transport waiting at the airfield." I shook my head. "With respect, sir, I need 15 minutes back inside first. Family matters." Davidson studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Take what time you need. The situation's contained for now based on your assessment. We can wait 20 minutes. With that clearance, I stepped out of the SUV and walked back toward the house. It was time to face a different kind of mission. the reckoning with a family whose understanding of me had just been fundamentally challenged. Re-entering my parents' house felt like stepping into a different atmosphere entirely. The festive buzz had been replaced by a charged silence periodically broken by urgent whispers. As I walked back onto the patio, conversations abruptly ceased. All eyes turned toward me with expressions ranging from confusion to disbelief to sudden, awkward respect. Amanda stood with Ryan near the cake table, her posture rigid and defensive. Our parents hovered nearby, looking shell-shocked. The extended family and friends had clustered in small groups, clearly discussing the unexpected revelation about the family's supposed underachiever. I approached my parents first, aware of the collective attention focused on this interaction. "Mom, Dad, I apologize for the interruption. That was Colonel Davidson, my commanding officer. There's a situation that requires my attention back at base. I'll need to leave shortly." My father cleared his throat, visibly struggling to reconcile the son he thought he knew with the officer who had just been saluted by a full colonel. "Lieutenant Colonel? You're a lieutenant colonel? Since when? Why didn't you tell us?" "For about 2 years now," I replied calmly. As for why I didn't mention it, I paused, considering my words carefully. It never seemed relevant to our conversations. My mother's eyes had filled with tears, though whether from pride, shock, or regret, I couldn't tell. "But your work. We thought you were just. We didn't know that I had responsibilities, that I had earned respect in my field." I kept my tone gentle but firm. "You never asked, Mom. Not once in 7 years did either of you ask about my actual role, my responsibilities, or my achievements." Amanda had approached now, Ryan trailing slightly behind her. Her face had recovered its color, but her expression remained stunned, as though she'd been struck by something invisible. "Lieutenant Colonel," she repeated, the title sounding foreign on her lips. That's significant rank, isn't it, Ryan?" She turned to her pilot boyfriend, suddenly seeking validation of what she'd witnessed. Ryan nodded, professional respect evident in his voice. "It's very significant, especially at your age, Matthew." "That's unusual advancement. What exactly do you do?" Amanda asked, her usual condescension replaced by genuine uncertainty. Clearly not pushing papers in some back office. For a moment, I considered simply leaving without explanation. Part of me, the part still wounded by years of dismissal, wanted to let them stew in their confusion. But I recognized that impulse as petty. I had grown beyond the need for their approval, which meant I could address their questions without emotional baggage. "I command a specialized unit focused on sensitive operations planning and execution," I explained, offering the unclassified version of my role. "My team develops strategies for complex situations that affect national security. That's why the colonel came personally. He needed my assessment on an ongoing operation." My father's expression shifted between disbelief and dawning realization. "Is that why the secretary was mentioned? You work directly with the Secretary of the Air Force?" "On certain matters, yes," I confirmed. "My unit's expertise is sometimes sought at that level." Amanda's face had transitioned from shock to something more complex, a mixture of embarrassment and defensive anger. "Why didn't you ever say anything? All these years, you let us think." "Let you think what, Amanda?" I met her gaze directly. "That I was a disappointment? That I hadn't measured up to your standard of success?" The questions hung in the air, not accusatory, but matter of fact. "We've barely spoken in 7 years, I continued. "And when we did, you never once asked about my work beyond confirming I was still in the military. You were too busy sharing your promotions, your acquisitions, your achievements." Ryan shifted uncomfortably beside Amanda, perhaps recognizing his own participation in the earlier condescension. The Air Force clearly values your expertise, he offered, a peace branch of professional acknowledgement. They do, I agreed. I've been fortunate to work with exceptional people who judge me on my abilities and contributions, not on preconceived notions or childhood patterns. My mother stepped forward, her hand tentatively reaching for my arm. Matthew, we had no idea. You should have told us. Would it have mattered, Mom? I asked quietly. Would a different title or rank have changed how you saw me? Because if it would have, that's exactly why I didn't share it. The question landed heavily. My parents exchanged glances that acknowledged an uncomfortable truth. They had categorized and dismissed me long ago, and that judgment had prevented them from seeing who I had actually become. My father, ever practical, attempted to pivot. Well, this is certainly a surprise, but a welcome one. We're proud of you, son. Very proud. His tone suggested he was trying to simply absorb this new information and move forward. But I wasn't quite ready to let it pass so easily. Dad, I appreciate that. But I'm the same person who walked in here 3 hours ago, when the pride wasn't evident. The same person who served for 10 years, without hearing that sentiment from either of you. Several relatives had drifted closer, abandoning pretense of not listening. My cousin Beth spoke up, her voice gentle but curious. What kinds of missions have you been involved with, Matthew? Can you talk about them? Most of my work is classified, I explained. But I can say that I've served in multiple theaters of operation, led teams in complex environments, and been recognized for contributions to national security objectives. Amanda's posture had subtly changed, her defensive stance gradually giving way to genuine interest. Have you been in combat situations? She asked, her voice lacking its usual edge. Yes, I said simply. Several times. The single word seemed to land with physical impact. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, while my father's expression shifted to one of genuine concern. The idea that I had faced real danger without them having any awareness struck them visibly. Were you ever hurt? My mother's question came in a whisper. I hesitated, then rolled up my sleeve to reveal a jagged scar running from elbow to wrist. Kabul, 2018. We don't need to get into details. The revelation created another ripple of shock through the gathered family members. The abstract concept of military service had suddenly become concrete and visceral. Ryan stepped forward, military recognition transcending our earlier awkward interaction. What decorations have you received? He asked, the professional respect in his voice unmistakable. I could have deflected, but decided that false modesty served no purpose here. Bronze Star with Valor Device, Purple Heart, Defense Meritorious Service Medal, among others. My father's face had transformed entirely, stunned recognition replacing his earlier confusion. Those are significant honors, he said quietly. We had no idea. No, I agreed. You didn't. Amanda had gone very still. Her earlier superiority completely evaporated. For perhaps the first time since childhood, she was looking at me not as her less successful brother, but as someone she didn't fully know or understand. I owe you an apology, she said finally, the words clearly difficult for her, earlier tonight, and honestly for years before that. We all do, my mother added, tears now flowing freely. We've been so wrong about you, Matthew. So terribly wrong. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of years of family dynamics shifting in this unexpected moment. I didn't come here looking for apologies or recognition, I said. I came because you're my family, despite our disconnection. I've built a life I'm proud of, with or without your understanding of it. Colonel Davidson appeared at the patio doorway. gesturing discreetly that our time was running short. "I need to go," I said, looking around at the transformed family gathering. "Duty calls." Quite literally. My father stepped forward, offering his hand in a gesture that felt different from our earlier greeting. "Son, when you're next on leave, we'd like to really hear about your work. Whatever you can share, we want to know you, the real you." The simple acknowledgement that there was more to know about me than they had assumed was perhaps the most meaningful part of the evening. I shook his hand, nodding my acceptance of the overture. As I prepared to leave, Ryan approached. "Lieutenant Colonel," he said, extending his hand with genuine respect. "It was an honor meeting you." Truly. Amanda stood beside him, her earlier mockery replaced by a subdued thoughtfulness. "Safe travels, Matthew," she said quietly. "And thank you for your service." The words were clearly unfamiliar on her tongue, but sincere. I nodded acknowledgement to both of them, then turned to follow Colonel Davidson out of the house, leaving behind a family whose understanding of me, and perhaps of themselves, had been irrevocably altered in the span of a single evening. The flight back to Colorado Springs gave me plenty of time to process the evening's unexpected developments. What had begun as an obligation to attend my parents' anniversary had transformed into a moment of reckoning for my entire family. As our military transport cut through the night sky, I found myself feeling strangely unburdened. Not triumphant or vindicated, but simply free of a narrative that had constrained me for decades. 3 days after returning to base, I received a call from Amanda. It was the first time she had initiated contact in 7 years. "Matthew," she began, her tone lacking its usual bravado, "I've been thinking about the other night. About how I've treated you. Not just at the party, but for years before that." "I'm listening," I said, neither dismissing nor immediately accepting what seemed to be the beginning of an apology. "I built my identity around being the successful one," she continued. "The achiever. I needed that comparison to feel secure in my own accomplishments. It was wrong, and I'm truly sorry." Her voice cracked slightly on the final words. "Thank you for saying that," I replied. "It couldn't have been easy. Ryan helped me see it, actually. After you left, he told me how inappropriate my behavior had been. Said he'd worked with military officers during his career, and explained just how significant your position must be." She paused. "He was pretty disappointed in me. How are things with you two?" I asked, genuinely curious about whether my revelation had affected their relationship. "We're okay. Better, actually. He said he respected how I acknowledged my mistake, and he wants to talk with you sometime. Officer to officer. He has genuine respect for your service." We spoke for nearly an hour, having perhaps the most authentic conversation of our adult lives. Without the competitive dynamic that had defined our relationship, we discovered we could actually communicate as equals. By the end of the call, something had shifted permanently between us. A week later, I received an email from my father. Something equally unprecedented. It was brief, but heartfelt. "Son, your mother and I have done a lot of soul-searching since the anniversary party. We failed to see who you had become because we were too attached to who we thought you were. The fault lies entirely with us. When you're ready, we'd like to start over, to get to know the man you are now, with pride and respect, Dad." Over the following months, small steps led to bigger ones. My parents visited Colorado Springs, and I gave them a tour of the base, sharing what I could about my work. Seeing my professional environment, meeting colleagues who clearly respected my leadership, helped them understand the reality of my career in a way that titles and ranks alone could not. Amanda and I established a new pattern of monthly phone calls. Without the need to compete or compare, we found common ground in discussing leadership challenges and the complexities of managing high-performance teams. Her corporate experiences and my military ones had surprising parallels once we moved past surface differences. During a leave period 6 months after the anniversary party, I visited my parents' home again. This time, the family photos included several new additions. Pictures of me in uniform at various ceremonies, carefully framed and displayed alongside Amanda's corporate achievements and Jason's family milestones. We wanted to correct an imbalance, my mother explained when she caught me studying the photo wall. To make sure this home reflects all our children equally, the gesture was symbolic but meaningful, a visual representation of the shift in family dynamics. I was no longer the invisible middle child, neither the golden daughter nor the baby of the family. I had become simply one of 3 valued children, each following their own path. Perhaps the most surprising development came during that visit, when Ryan sought me out for a private conversation. As we sat on the back patio where months earlier Amanda had mocked my career, he spoke with genuine curiosity and respect about my military experience. His questions were thoughtful and informed, free from the condescension that had colored our first meeting. By the end of our conversation, we had established the beginning of what might become a real friendship, based not on family obligation, but on mutual respect. The most important change, however, wasn't in how my family saw me, but in how I saw myself in relation to them. For years, I had carried the weight of their judgment, even as I built a life separate from it. The revelation at the anniversary party had freed me not just from their misperceptions, but from my own need for their validation. I realized that true confidence comes not from external recognition, but from internal certainty about one's own worth. This isn't to say that everything became perfect overnight. Old patterns occasionally resurfaced, requiring gentle but firm correction. The journey of redefining family relationships, after decades of established dynamics, is neither quick nor linear. But the foundation had fundamentally shifted from dismissal to respect, from assumption to curiosity, from judgment to acceptance. What I learned through this unexpected family reckoning applies far beyond my particular circumstances. Too often, we allow ourselves to be defined by others' perceptions, particularly those formed during our formative years. We accept labels applied by family members, teachers, early peers, incorporating them into our self-concept in ways that can limit our growth and potential. True freedom comes from recognizing that, while we cannot control others' perceptions, we can refuse to be constrained by them. Each of us has the capacity to forge an identity based not on external validation, but on our own values, choices, and actions. The respect that matters most is not granted by family name or childhood status, but earned through integrity, service, and commitment to purpose. My military career taught me that leadership isn't about titles or authority, but about earning the genuine respect of those you serve alongside. That principle applies equally to personal relationships. Respect cannot be demanded based on family position. It must be earned through consistent actions that demonstrate character and worth. The moment when Colonel Davidson walked into that anniversary party and rendered a formal salute didn't matter because it impressed my family. It mattered because it represented the culmination of years spent building a life of purpose and service, regardless of whether that purpose was recognized by those who had known me longest. For anyone struggling with family dynamics defined by comparison, competition, or misperception, I offer this hard-won wisdom. Your value is not determined by others' ability to see it. Build a life that aligns with your own values and purpose, and the right kind of recognition will follow, not necessarily from those you've always sought it from, but from those who truly see and appreciate who you've become. The real victory isn't in proving others wrong about you. It's in becoming so secure in your own identity that their opinions, whether positive or negative, no longer define your sense of self. That's the freedom I found. Not in the moment of revelation at my parents' anniversary party, but in the years of service and purpose that preceded it. Have you ever been underestimated by someone whose opinion once mattered deeply to you? How did you respond? Did you try to prove them wrong, or did you find a way to move beyond needing their validation? Share your story in the comments below. If this journey of overcoming family expectations resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe for more stories about finding strength through adversity. And remember, the most powerful salute isn't the one that others give you, but the one you earn from yourself through living with integrity and purpose. Thank you for listening, and until next time, may you find the courage to define yourself on your own terms.